Let's talk about trusts. We still have one more hour of the class. So please stay awake, please pay attention. So in any Active Directory environment, a trust relationship is between two domains or forests that allows users from one domain or forest to access resources in the other, and vice versa. A trust can be automatic or explicitly established. TDOs or trusted domain objects represent trust relationships in Active Directory. Now, there are some attributes of trusts. For example, there is trust direction. A trust could be a one-way trust. In case of a one-way trust, direction of access is always opposite to direction of trust. That is, if the trust is from the trusting domain to the trusted domain, direction of access would be the other way around. I mean, it is just no need to get confused in this one, trusting and trusted. That is one of the confusing parts of this. No need to go into details of that. We can simply think of it as this, that in case of one-way trust, users from one of the domains can access resources of the other one. And of course, then trusts could be two-way or bidirectional, where users are from one domain, from both the domains can access resources in each other. So it could be bidirectional as well. I'm not. Am I not? Oh, my bad. Thank you. Let me go back to the previous one. So trusts could be one way, where users from one of the domains from one domain can access resources in the other one. That is a one-way trust. And then it could be a two-way trust, where users from both the domains can access resources in the other one. Now, trusts have types. Another property, sorry, types come in a moment. Trusts have another property called transitivity. Now, transitivity is something that we have learned in algebra as well. That is, if A is equals to B and B is equals to C, then A is equals to C. If domain A has a bidirectional trust relationship with domain B, and domain B has a bidirectional trust relationship with domain C, theoretically, practically, domain A and C have a bidirectional trust relationship as well. Okay? That is what transitivity means. As an attacker, this means that if domain C is compromised, you can go from domain C to domain B, and then domain B to domain A. That is what transitivity means. All the default trusts that are all the intraforest trusts, these are the default trusts, like tree root, parent child, that is the trust between domains in a forest, are always two-way, that is bidirectional transitive trusts. What are non-transitive trusts? The trusts that are explicitly established, external trusts. So what are types of trusts? There are two types, default or automatic. So a parent-child trust relationship like we have in between Money Corp and Dollar Corp and Dollar Corp and US, that is a parent-child trust relationship. This is always going to be two-way transitive. Or a tree root trust, where a new domain tree is added on a forest root, that is also going to be two-way transitive. A good example would be this. Let's say there are two trees in a forest. A, B, and C in tree 1 and Y and Z in tree 2. What does the transitivity mean here? The trust types here are parent-child between A and B, parent-child between A and C, and parent-child between A and Z. However, between A and Y, it is a tree root trust. But this is an intra-forest trust, that is within a forest. So it is bidirectional transitive all the time. What does that mean? That means users from domain B would be able to access resources in domain Z and the other way around. All right. A question is, can child domain, that is Z in tree 2, enumerate child domain in tree 1? Yes, because the transitivity is there. Without transitivity, we'll not be able to do that. As an attacker, this also means that if you compromise B here, you can go from B to A. Once you are on A, you can go from A to C and A to Y, and then from Y to Z. Forest is the security boundary, even if a single domain in your entire forest is compromised. You can kiss the entire forest goodbye. So this is what transitivity is. You can access resources as a normal user, as an attacker, whatsoever. It is working as intended. You can access resources from one domain to another one within a forest. That is transitivity. Now, an example of a non-transitive trust relation would be an external trust. So an external trust is a trust relationship between two domains of different forests where at least one of the domains is not a forest root. So a trust relationship between forest root domains is called a forest trust. It is not called an external trust. So that is a different type of trust, which we'll discuss on the next slide. External trust is a trust relationship between not at least one of the participating domains is not the forest root. For example, here, if we have in forest 1, we have A, B, and C domains. In forest 2, we have Y and Z. It could be a two-way trust or it could be a one-way because it is not an automatic trust. You need to explicitly create a trust. And forest is a security boundary. What does that mean? That means that, let's say if the Z domain is compromised here, one can make their way from Z to Y. That completes compromise of the forest too. However, across the forest trust, regardless of whether it is a two-way trust or a one-way trust, there is only a limited exposure. Only explicitly shared resources would be accessible. Even to the domain admin of Z, they could only access resources in B that are explicitly shared with them. If there are no resources shared with them, the best they would be able to do is enumerate. That is it. Nothing else. Now, a question is, can we go from Z to B and then B to C? You cannot unless you have access to a resource on B that provides you credentials of, let's say, the domain admins on B. Otherwise, you won't be because it is an external trust. There is no transitivity. If you are coming from Z, there is no transitivity between B to A and B to C. Unless you provide explicit credentials, you extract some credentials from B and then you use those credentials to access A or C, then it is fine. But transitivity means that without providing explicit credentials here, you should be able to go from Z to B and B to C. That's not going to happen. Why external trust is used? It should be. Ideally, if you ask me, there should never be a single forest environment. Unfortunately, that is why we begin with the class. When I said that when you hear the word domain or active, not domain, when you hear the word Active Directory, think of it as a forest. Because forest is the security boundary. I don't see a logical reason of an organization using a single forest with multiple domains. It is simply not secure enough. Any organization that needs more than one domain should go for multiple forests so that you cut down on implicit attack paths. A single forest, yes, it is. It is. I mean, both of them are pretty common, to be honest. Large enough organizations that have been around for some time, they have multiple forests, but a single forest setup is probably the most common one. All right, so there are multiple questions. Let me pick them one at a time. A question is for the trust relationship. Let me clear this once. For the trust relationship from Z to C, I have to write it again. Give me a moment. Question is for the trust relationship from C to Z, from Z to C, does that allow users in C to access only specific resources in Z? Yes. Because the direction of trust is from Z to C, direction of access would be from C to Z. That means users from C domain can access resources in the Z domain, but only those resources that are explicitly specified. For example, let's say there is a share here called files. Now, unless the ACL of the files folder allow users from the domain C to access it, they won't be able to do that. So only explicitly specified resources can be accessed. That is how interforest, between forest trusts work. Another question is, in a forest, is parent-child trust given by default between multiple domains? Yes. A parent-child trust is any domain that precedes it in the naming convention. $corp.moneycorp means there would be a bidirectional parent-child between $corp and moneycorp. US.$corp.moneycorp means there would be a bidirectional between US and $corp. Any domain that precedes the current one in the namespace, in the naming convention, is the parent. So you get an entire forest of chained domains. A question is, what is the best way to share multiple forests? Is it the external trusts? Yes. A lot of IT overhead, but that is the most secure option. Forest trusts are also widely used for this, but forest trusts are a bit more, I would say, uh, lenient compared to external trusts. The reason being you can configure transitivity in forest trusts. Is there a way to change the parent-child trust relationship within a forest? There is nothing that you can do. There are quarantine mechanisms. You can mark a forest or domain quarantined. But I would say, assume this, that within a forest, if you have access to one of the domains, the entire forest is gone for good. Absolutely no way of securing it. So this is an external trust. Now there is another type of trust between forests. If there is a trust relationship between root domains, forest root domains, it is called a forest trust. If you want, you can create a forest trust to be transitive. What does that mean? Transitivity across forest trusts is, if you configure it that way, a domain in the forest one, users from this domain can access resources in another domain of forest two. That is what transitivity means here. But there is no implicit trust. If forest one has a bidirectional trust relation with forest two, and forest two has a bidirectional trust relationship with forest three, forest one and three would not have an implicit trust. All right. Now, what does this mean? This means that if we have an Active Directory environment that looks something like this, let's say it is a multinational organization that has a single forest. Let's say it is, for example, a US-based organization. And let's say they have, of course, an office in SFO. Let's say they have something in New York. Uh, let's say the SFO office has its, of course, its backend in Bangalore. They also have, let's say, let's say they have a back office in India where they have something in Bangalore. Let's say something else in, uh, let's say what, Delhi, for example. They have a voice support in Philippines. Let's say they have a manufacturing site in China, and so on. Now, the way we understand the way a forest works is if any of these domains is compromised, no matter how many levels they are, let's say if the Bangalore site is compromised, they can make their way from Bangalore to the IN site, IN to SFO, SFO to US. If the Philippines site goes away, and it is just one domain that needs to be compromised. Once you are, you keep going up the levels. Once you are at the forest root, it's game over. Now, how do you recover from this? There is no way to recover, to be honest. Why? So let's say this site was compromised. You think that, okay, I have a plan. What I'm going to do is I'll isolate the BLR domain here and change its Kirby TGT hash, and I'll change its trust key. Yes, of course. So you can change, let's say, all the credentials that you can think of on this TC here, but the attacker would already have the Kirby TGT hash, trust key, and everything else from here. Meanwhile, you change this, they would have it from here. There's no race condition here. What I'm saying here is, okay, let's say, or there is a race condition. So let's say you have changed here and moved to here. An attacker may actually move back here and extract the new ones. Is it actually possible to recover from a forest compromise? A lot of organizations have done that. Do they get the trust back in their forest? Depends on their risk appetite. Of course, I mean, the famous saying that the only way to get trust back in your forest is to rebuild it. Of course, it is easier said than done. But rarely, there are a couple of organizations, a large, like really huge car manufacturer from Europe has done that in 2018, I believe. But yeah, very rare. That is why take care of your tier 0 assets. Or if I talk in the lingo of the enterprise access model, anything that goes in your control plane, take care of that. There is a very interesting question that someone asked. What do you think of the idea to have a disconnected domain controller that you connect to the network one time a month to get synchronized with the other sort of emergency domain controller that can be used as a backup? That is what the backup is. Uh, So not very useful, as someone already answered that it would have the same Kirby TGT hash. So no point. But that was something that Myers, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, that is what they did during the NotPetya ransomware accidentally. So they had all of their domain controllers encrypted by the NotPetya ransomware, but they had uh, one of their sites in Ghana had a power cut at that on that day. It was for a few hours. So they actually had someone flew in from Ghana with the physical domain controller, hand it over to someone in London, and that person flew back. That actually happened. There are actually disconnected domain controllers. Shipping industry uses that a lot. So they are not always online, almost always, but not always. But not for the security, that's more for availability. So not really useful in this case. So question is, the $1 million question here is, so what does a company do in case of a full forest compromise? Oddly specific. Start from scratch. That is, rebuild your entire forest is the most common thing that anyone would tell you. Specifically consultants. You hire a consultant. I mean, I have nothing against consultants. I've worked as one. I still sometimes do. But that is what a consultant would tell you. The most sensible thing is to, if you can, I mean, call in the specialists. That is the first thing. Bring in more consultants, actually. So bring in people who have actually dealt with this. They can establish a timeline for you. If they can, then a backup could be the way ahead. If you bring in some good IR people who can actually establish a timeline for you, that, okay, this was the point of time 3 days ago, 3 months ago, or whatsoever, that when you were compromised, at least you could do is start from a backup from that date. At least that is something that you could do. To be honest, I know more about the attack part here. I've never been involved in a full scale uh, recovery from a forest compromise. I mean, I have been into discussions with this, and I was representing the client as a subject matter expert, let's say. But the usual organizations that take care of that, they would be able to guide you. It's an entirely different thing. If you're large enough, of course. If you're a small shop where you have like five IT guys for 500 employees, then yeah, which is like what, 80% of the organizations, 90% of the organizations. So yeah, best of luck then. Is this issue solved in AAD? Oh my God. Now this triggers me. Uh, Azure AD or Entride is an entirely different field. But I can tell you that I just said that yesterday in the Azure AD class, in the Azure class, that if you think that a domain admin or an enterprise admin compromise is risky, you have never seen a global administrator compromise. Global administrator is the God mode, right? Have you seen God? No, the God doesn't talk to you. So get the global administrator role. That is how you see God. There is nothing that brings you back from a global administrator compromise, which is, of course, the topmost role in Entra ID. There's nothing that brings you back from it. If your domain admin or an enterprise admin uh, role is compromised, there is a slight chance. At least you have a hammer, you can smash the server, you can pull the plug. In case of cloud, there is no such plug. Best of luck breaking into Microsoft's data center and pulling the right plug. It would take you more time in figuring out where your data is. It would probably already be in 14 different zones. So no, compromise of the highest privilege in an enterprise is not addressed, has not been addressed, cannot be addressed. There is no way where, for privileged actions, you will need privileged users. If you're using privileged users for normal tasks, you will be compromised one day. All right. So it is very hard to come back from a compromise, but it is even harder in case of cloud. Okay. And of course, if you are using hybrid identity, you know, I would probably have dreamt if I was in your place and my organization using hybrid identity and my domain admins or enterprise admins or global administrator role gets compromised. I would probably start a career as a farmer. No, no point. No point. I'll probably finally start farming. It's hybrid identity is uh it has brought in such levels of complexity that if your organization uses that, and a lot of organizations do that, then your cloud and on-prem environment is mingled in such a way that you cannot even imagine unless you read it up. So coming back to the question, no, it has not been solved in Entra ID. That was about trusts. Now, how do you enumerate the trusts? Of course, we've seen that how we can do that in Bloodhound by running the query map domain trusts. It shows you the trust relationships. $Corp has a bidirectional trust relationship with Eurocorp, which is a different forest. It has a trust relationship with MoneyCorp, which is its parent, and US.Corp, which is its child. How do you enumerate this from the command line using PowerView? You can use PowerView or the AD module. If we run get domain trust, we can list the trust relationships. So the current domain has a trust relationship with MoneyCorp, which is within forest bidirectional. US.Corp, which is a child within forest, of course, bidirectional. Eurocorp, filter sits, that is external trust, but it is still a bidirectional trust. Okay. Will Bloodhound also list the trusts between on-prem and AD? I think it can do that. Yes. We can get the trust for the current domains. For any other domain, we can list all the domains in the current forest. We can list global catalogs. We can get forest trusts. Note that there are no forest trusts in the lab, so you may draw a blank here. So the idea is that with a single command or just a couple of commands, you can take a look at an entire organization. You can map out an attack path just like that. For example, here, even if this was not compromised, if you are an attacker who is let's say let's say this is MoneyCorp. Just with this information, you may see that, okay, then looks like if I target someone in this location or this location, even if one administrator is compromised, then we can probably go for the entire organization with a single command as a normal domain user. And please keep this in mind. I get this a lot, specifically in the Azure class. I mean, there we talk about practical initial access method. So I don't get that much once we look at the initial access methods. But before that, a lot of people say that, okay, but how do we get initial access? That is something I get here as well. We are assuming breach. How do we get initial access? Pick up your favorite threat report, Microsoft's own digital defense report, or you pick up Mandiant's M trends or whatever. If nothing, if let's say you are a cybercrime group, or let's say a nation state, and if you do not have time, energy, or patience to find out stable footholds, there is a category of threat actors called access brokers who would send you. I mean, you look at tweets and LinkedIn posts from IR guys who keep hunting for stuff in the dark web. You will see people selling access to billion-dollar organizations for a few $100s. So if nothing, you can go to access brokers and request access, purchase access to an organization. So even if you don't have the necessary skill set, you can at least have the access.